Hi, everyone. Welcome to Life Edge. I'm joined today by our co-host and friend, Susan Nash. Hey, how are you, Susan?
I'm fine. Thank you.
I'm fine.
Everything's fabulous.
Here's our intro. And we are back. Well, Susan, what a week, huh?
Yes.
Busy.
Very busy.
Well, today we've got a guest from the other side of the pond. He is from England, and his name is Colin Steed. He's got a long background in training development. He runs an equivalent organization to what we call the ASTD here. It is called the Learning and Development Institute.org. So we will be showing that up pretty soon. And let's introduce Colin Steed. Colin, how are you today?
Hi there, Rick. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here.
Oh, it's our pleasure, and we're glad you could make it.
Yes, it's morning over there, I understand. We've had a lovely sunny day, so I'm ready now for our discussion and our chat. I'm really looking forward to it.
Sounds good. And we were joking a little bit at the beginning of the show that you are actually the cousin of John Steed, who was one of the Avengers, correct?
I wish, yes. With Emma Peel, I wish.
Yes. So anyway, John, Colin, how did you wind up getting into training and e-learning?
Well, it's a very long story, but I'm going to take you back to prehistoric days in the 60s. And I used to work for a company called British European Airways, which turned into British Airways. And we worked on a new thing then called computers, and I was an operator, so we were feeding punch cards in, and we were doing paper tapes to feed all the instructions in, and we were loading these massive things, platters of discs, and we used to run the British Airways engineering department programs. And what happened there was that I think I probably realised that a lot of people used to come to me and say, why did you do it like that, and how do you do this? And so I ended up being, without sounding too big-headed, a bit of a go-to guy. People used to come to me and say, I'm not quite sure how you do this. So I went to the boss and said, about setting up a little training department where I could teach people the basics, really. And after 10 years of doing that, I wanted to move on. I'd sort of done that. And from there, I went to a company that used to run big conferences and courses in IT, although it was called DP in those days. So I told you it was a long time ago. And we used to put on these conferences, and I had the idea of setting up a magazine. And so I launched a magazine, never done it before in my life, just went for it. And it was all about training, IT training in those days, or DP training in those days. And from there, after a few years, the readers used to say, why can't we have some sort of organisation where we can set some standards? There's no standards, there's no certifications. There was absolutely nothing for them. And so that's when I started very tentatively an institution called the Institute of IT Training. I think that was in 95, about that time. And it just went from there, and it's just grown from there. So we had standards, we created standards, using the members to consult with and to ask them to help us get these standards up. We had certification programs for train the trainer, which, as I say, over here there was nothing really like that. The other big institution, which is still going, it was more focused on personnel and HR. but ours was for practical practicing trainers.
That's interesting. Now, just out of curiosity, were you ever involved, because you were with the airlines, with the airline? That's probably a little early, but things did happen with the airline industry CBT committee, the AICC.
I did. I did have dealings with them, but I can't say that I had a lot of a lot to do with them. But I did consult certain things with them and ask them questions. But yeah, that's going back. That's pre-SCORM and all that. So,
yeah.
I told you I'm old. It's it feels even more so now. But,
I remember
the
everything
start.
you're talking about, so you know where I'm at. So
Yeah, so it's that was and really everything that I've done has gone from there, and we've done really well as an institute. We changed from being just strictly IT to learning and performance, which is where the training in corporations is going, and thank goodness. So it's not all about training people and putting them on courses, but I'll talk to you about that a bit later. And so the institute is doing extremely well. We run a big major conference every year, which is coming up in September. We have our own very prestigious Learning Awards, which is held at the Dorchester, so we look forward to that every year and dressing up for that. And it's just going from strength to strength, really. And I'm of the age now, as you can see, that I'm starting to cut down the work that I do for them and having a little bit of spare time. And being a person who can't stop working, much to my wife's annoyance, that's when I came up with Learning Now TV, which I see as going back to my publisher roots in the old days, but it's the modern version of publishing, which is doing what you're doing here, which is live TV streamed to the viewers.
yeah, which is a lot of fun.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh, definitely. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I think one thing that fascinates me is that the combination of having courses and then also having a large conference or convention, and that's one of the things that I'm involved with at the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. In fact, we just came back from our annual convention. I'm still recovering. What day is this? But it's but we combine a lot of breakout sessions and themed sessions with courses as well. And we have different kinds of hybrid courses. We have face-to-face, but then the sessions themselves are also essentially hybrid in the sense that they all can have an online element. So it's more like pull rather than pushing content. It's pulling it based on what you need. And I was wondering how your conference is structured.
Well, it's very strange that you should ask me that, because this year I've completely changed the conference, and that was from feedback from various members, but also some friends that I have in the States, for people like Bob Mosher and Elliot Macy and people like that, talking to them. And so what we've decided to do this year is, rather than have a conference like everybody else's conference, which is basically somebody standing up there and lecturing to you and you're just sitting there passively, we decided that we're going to have a lecture-free zone conference, and that's the tagline. So what we're going to do is we're going to have topics that people want to learn about, but we're going to have them as workshops, and they're going to have takeaways and work to do during the session and takeaways to do after the session about how they're going to implement whatever we're talking about in their workplace. And it's somebody said to me the other day, that's a bit of a bold move to go like that. But that's all the motivation I needed, to be honest, because I passionately believe that the problem with trainers is that they just lecture to people and they don't involve the people who are there to learn. And so the learners just switch off and they just wait for the coffee break. So we're trying it out, and this is how we've been all through since '95. We've tried new things, and we tend to be the first with things, and that's what keeps us fresh and our members happy.
And it's a good idea because I hear a lot about the complaints and the reviews when people go to trade shows and conferences that they don't like a particular speaker, or they didn't like the content, or it was too slow or too fast. And more often than not, people complain about not having enough time to ask questions.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah,
Terrible.
and it makes sense too, because these in this case we're dealing with adults, we're dealing with a lot of professionals. They work in companies and organizations, and there's nothing better than to get ideas from other people who've been through the same things or had the same problems and how they resolved them.
Yeah, that's right. And that's how the sessions will be. So there will be, a speaker leading the session, but we're going to get them to ask each other questions about how do you do this particular, let's say we're talking about MOOCs and how you should be looking at them for your organization. So what we want the leader to do, really is a facilitator of learning, is to talk about MOOCs and why you should be interested, but get them working and get them talking to each other and coming up with suggestions and, well, what are the problems in your organisation if you implemented this? What barriers would you have? And then the facilitator could then say to the audience, well, how can we solve this problem for Fred over there who's got this problem with his boss or his management? So it's really it's a working session, and that's what I think, and I'd like to see conferences be. And then after that, we've got the networking sessions and the networking areas, which is where most people get their learning from at conferences. The bar and the places where all the delegates meet up. So it really is going to be. We're very excited about it.
Well, I have another quick question and observation just after seeing how this works. I love this idea of a lecture-free zone. Now, the problem could be that it requires people to come prepared or with at least an idea of a problem that they want to tackle, and it does not allow people to be just completely passive. And that's excellent. But like the example that you have of a MOOC is a good one, or say extremely situated learning. For example, if a person needs to come up with training that gets people into compliance for, say, safety or something like that, and they have to do it quickly, and they can't just be checking the boxes. They really need to come up with an attitude or mindset of safety. How can you do that as well as just the mechanical elements of how this is how you do it?
Well, I think what you can do is you can use the audience of peers to help solve the problems. And that is what really, when they go out and network at the bar and wherever, that's actually what they're doing. They're actually talking to their peers about, well, I know you implemented a Yammer system, and I've tried that, but I don't get anybody on it. So how did you do it? Well, the way I did it was this. How about blah blah blah? And that's how it works. That's how networking works. And I think bringing that into the conference room. I mean, you probably couldn't do it at ASTD where they get thousands, or learn Maze's conference where they get thousands of people. We get about 300, and there's three streams. So if you get 100 in each room, you can do it that way. But it is an experiment.
It's also nice that you're in a smaller group, because that again makes it a little bit more dynamic. When you have thousands, it's pretty hard to control where it goes, because just by the nature of the number of people and their interests and everything else. Though again, when they go to sessions, you're assuming they have an interest in that specific session, which is always a good thing. But you're right, and there is a tendency now in the shows, and I've seen this, to bring in people who really aren't expert at much of anything as speakers, and I find that just, do you really want to learn from somebody who doesn't know anything, or would you prefer learning from somebody who's got experience and everything else? And I know why shows do that. They want to get new blood in all the time and change the speakers. But I don't think there's a lot of vetting going on with a lot of the speakers as to who are we bringing in? What kind of background do they really have? What have they done?
Sure, yeah, I agree. I think it's a combination of things. Is that you don't want somebody who is all theory,
Right.
and has never done it. What you do want is somebody who's actually had this problem or has been involved in implementing this solution, or is working in a consultancy where they deal with it every day. So they're used to how to handle these problems. And you're very right, is that it's not so much their knowledge, because the knowledge comes from the audience. It's like working as a team together, rather than one person saying, this is how it must be done. If you don't do it like this, you're doing it wrong. Things have changed, I think, and I'm very pleased to see it.
Yeah, so they take the role.
Evolve in this way.
So in essence, they take the role of the facilitator, helping people, and with their own experience, they can add points or maybe help guide the conversation in a way that they can reach some conclusions that maybe they haven't experienced before, and maybe the facilitator has, that would help them grow.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, well,
I agree, but here's a sort of a counterpoint. Okay, so if it's a facilitator, yes, in a session, but a general breakout keynote, sometimes it's good to be a little bit controversial. So at least to give people food for thought, or to look at more metacognitive things, say discovery thinking, or ways of being creative and looking at solutions in a different way, or even things like maybe neuroplasticity, things that are potentially provocative and controversial.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, we have got a keynote who is going to do a lecture type session, although after talking to him, I've said that, I do want him to include the audience and to get them thinking and working. But I think most sessions you can include the audience in it, and by that I don't mean just how many people have done this, put your hands up, and how many people have done that, put your hands up. That's not interactivity for me. I want them to think about the problem, or what they've just learnt about, or what they've just read up about, and to bring their problem to the conference and get some answers. The answers may not come from that session. It might be talking to the people afterwards, during the breaks or whatever. But it's a working conference, not just to sit back and listen.
I was at the DevLearn last year, and I did one session that was on, and it was actually one of those morning buzz kind of sessions on emotion and e-learning.
All right.
And really the whole idea of that one was, I would ask questions. Literally, that's most of what I would ask. What if we did this? What would happen if you had training that had emotion in it? What do you think would happen? And they would start saying things. What do you consider emotion in e-learning?
Yeah.
How many of you remember things that were flat, unemotional, dead? Okay. What do you remember? And then hands come up and say, wait, I remember I took this one training where they did something, and I gave some examples of how we killed somebody in one of our trainings, which was a safety piece, and it was really effective. Or how we used humor. Now, humor is risky because not everybody likes the same humor, but there is generic humor, if you will, that can be funny without offending anybody, because nowadays you have to offend everybody. So, but really, we lose so much of that. There's a lot of talk right now here in the States, and I don't know if England's as bad as we are. I don't think they are, just from some of the comedians I've seen. We're so politically correct here that nobody can say anything anymore. And we lose, and we lose that ability to laugh at ourselves. We lose the ability to learn from ourselves because we're too busy defending ourselves. And that's such a shame, because when we have so little Teflon in our systems, then everybody's raw and ready to just scream and cry for whatever reason. That's hysteria in e-learning, not emotion in e-learning. That's a big difference. But what do you think of that approach of asking questions and kind of guiding the audience into just different pathways to some of the solutions that are out there?
Exactly. It's all about involving the audience. If you don't involve them, they're going to switch off. They're going to be looking at their phones, or they're going to be looking out the window or tapping their feet, waiting for the coffee break to come. So it's all about training is all about learning. Training is all about involving your audience. And without involving them, you're not going to switch them on at all, and their brain is not going to be eager to learn anything. It's just not going to happen. And just to tell you why I'm so passionate about this is that I developed a certification program for virtual classroom trainers about 3 or 4 years ago. And that has, by developing that and realizing that you don't get any body language when you're training online. You can see the tutor now and again on the webcam, but we encourage you to switch that off once you've done your introduction. But that is hard to involve the audience when you can't see them. So everything that I've put into that certification program, which is now a global, everybody's using, all the major organizations are using it now. I won't mention names just in case I can't, but some of the massive software companies of the world are using our programs to train all their trainers. And the reason that I'm so passionate about involving learners comes from all that, because that is tough. I don't know if you've ever done it, Rick, or but to actually train somebody at the other, when you're just looking in your screen and you've got 8 or 10 people on the other side who you don't know what they're doing.
Right.
That content's got to be good, and the way you deliver it has got to be good. And the way you do that is to involve them and get them talking, get them thinking, get them telling you stories, getting them to tell you what their problems are. And that's why I'm probably over passionate about this conference being not a sit back and listen thing. It's a let's sit forward and get involved.
Yeah, and to answer your question, I did a series for Adobe on their Connect team of how to teach in the virtual classroom.
All right.
And I did that for about a year. And I think we did about, maybe not that often, I think we did about 6 or 8 of them. And a lot of it was learning how to use your voice. Because you really can't see people unless you have webcams on everybody, and usually they don't, especially if you have a large group. And these had anywhere from 200 to 400 people in them. So how do you keep their attention? You have to do it with your voice. You have to lower your voice sometimes. You have to bring it a little bit higher. You have to call people randomly, and all of a sudden they're like, what? But those are all things that can get engaged. And open it up to questions, open it up to answers from other people. And then if they realize that at any moment they could be called, they're much more alert.
That's right.
Also, you've got to mix the materials up. It can't just be you talking the whole hour.
No.
Because that usually, unless you're very, very good at keeping your voice going, your energy levels going, raising the energy, lowering the energy, it takes a lot of work and effort, and it does take training. And like you said, you can't just throw somebody in a virtual classroom and say, go. Because there are techniques that they need to learn in order to manage a group that can do it. And I'm not tooting my horn on this, but we were able to keep, out of, let's say, 400 people in a classroom, we had a dropout rate of about 2 people. And that was hard. And I didn't do anything that I thought was special in it. It was just trying to apply the same principles that we're teaching to what we're doing. It kept people interested.
Yeah.
But it's real easy for a lot of speakers, and it's happened to all of us, that you get in, and by the time you're done, 50% have left.
Sure.
Now, it's not as devastating when everybody leaves on you in a virtual classroom. If you're in a conference and you're talking and 50 people leave on you, that's not good. Something is desperately wrong on that one. But that can happen to people too. And it just depends on, are you giving them what they think they're supposed to get?
Sure.
And that's the problem with conferences. When you have a topic, people rush to the topic, but they may not think that's what they want. They may think it's something different from what's actually being offered. And
Well, yeah, that's another problem with conferences for me, is that quite often they're written for by the marketing people. So they're selling you something that you want to go and see, but when you get there, the presenter or the conference speaker, it actually doesn't cover what is in the. That's a massive problem too for conferences. And
Colin and Rick, I have just to go back to what you were saying earlier, and I think you both said this, and I'm excited by it. You both emphasized the role of story and personal experience, and also in social learning and collaborative learning. And then what's fascinating to me is that now we're in an era where perhaps we're not going to have like live video because it's just too much bandwidth, but we can easily do synchronous communication during the workshop. So we can have chats or Twitter, but by being able to share stories and that element of life personalization, there's something about telling a story that captures people.
well, also there's the other thing. We as a people are storytellers by nature. We tell stories from generation to generation to generation. We tell stories when we talk to each other as friends. All of us here together this is the first time we're all together in one spot, but individually we've talked to each other and we've told stories. We tell stories about ourselves, about our people we know. We ask for your stories. And that's really the key. I get a lot of people saying, how did you learn to interview? And I said, I didn't really learn to interview, just like none of us here did. We just do it naturally because we're curious about people. And,
Sure.
and as a result, when you're curious, you want to learn about them, so you ask questions. You like the stories. I love storytelling. My wife can't stand it anymore. It's like, are you telling me that story again? But literally, we all tell stories, and we all learn from telling those stories. Now, how do you get that story into a training, a virtual classroom, an e-learning format? That's the tricky part, because now you've got to slightly depersonalize something that's more personal.
Yeah. Well, I think the way we do it on our virtual classroom courses, and we do teach about storytelling and how to use them, is to relate it to something that everybody understands. So, for instance, somebody asked me the other day, how is L&D moving these days? What change is taking place? And I said, well, what we've got to change from is being shopkeepers, where people come in, knock on our door and say, L&D, can I have a course on blah, blah, blah? And I've got 10 people who I want to put through it, and I need it done by next week. That's the shopkeeper syndrome. We're moving away from that. And I will tell you the story now of how I've come up with to explain the way L&D department should be working, as opposed to a shopkeeper. And that is, I was at the doctor's the other day, or a couple of weeks ago actually, and he sat me down and I said, I've got this something wrong with me. I'm coughing a lot and blah blah blah. And he asked me, loads of different types of questions, and what he was doing is he was finding out what the symptoms were and trying to find out what the problem was so that he could give the cure, which could have been pills or probably wouldn't need to be pills. It could be I need to do more exercise, or it could be something else. So I think L&D has to change from being shopkeepers to being doctors, or if you like, a performance, a personal trainer, where you're asking what the problem is, and you're trying to find out what's gone wrong. It could be a process, or it could be that you do need a little bit of help on how to do something. But you've got to be this consultative person. So there I've got over if you like, how L&D department have got to change from what they are and have been for the past hundreds of years to what the world has changed to now, and how you've got to be by telling the story of the doctor.
Mm-hmm. That's a great analogy too. I remember when I was in high school journalism, I learned something that has stuck with me forever since then, which they don't teach in instructional design, and that's who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask those questions, that takes you exactly to what you're talking about, which is that doctor approach. It's a consultative. You're asking questions to get to what the solution is. First, you have to figure out who's involved, what kind of problem do we have, when does this happen, where does it happen, or where do you want it to happen? I mean, all of that can really lead to a good set of questions that give you a foundation. But you don't need to do a 40-week needs analysis. You just need to ask some simple questions.
And quite often, training is not the answer.
Right.
If you ask the right questions and you find out what the causes of the problem are, it could be, as I say, it might be a mistake in a process or something of a process that's not working. Mm-hmm. So that's what you need to put right, not put them on a course for a week. And this is, I got most of this information from the great Cathy Moore from your part of the world, whose action mapping is absolutely like a Bible to us. And, that's what it is. It's asking them what the problem is and talking about how you can put things right.
Well, the other thing that and you touched on this too is the shopkeeper mentality. And I've been saying this for years. If the training people are not proactive and go find what the problems are in companies and help solve them, take that, if you will, the current idea of Six Sigma. Take the approach of going out and finding, don't create the problem, but try to find solutions for problems that are out there, and proactively be a service department. In other words, you go out and talk to people within your organization to find out what they're doing. You don't even have to find out what they want, just find out what they're doing. And as you find out what they're doing, maybe you'll find some areas that, we could help you with that.
That's right. You've got to talk to the actual staff. It's no good a manager coming in and saying, our call centre we're getting so many calls in now, then, our call centre staff need a course on how to, handle all these questions and how to handle all these answers. You've got to ask the staff what sort of questions they're getting, what are the problems that they've been highlighting, and unless you talk to them and find out what their pain is, you're not going to solve anything. So it's really an important. It's performance consulting. This is. It's asking why first of all, do you need training? Do you really need training? Why? What would happen if we didn't train you on this call center? And what are the problems you're having? And find out what the symptoms are, and look at how to put it right. And it quite often is not training. And we could save our organisation thousands, and by not putting on irrelevant courses.
That's a really good point. I mean, we work with some very large financial companies, and a lot of the work we do is often customer service training, and they do things called huddles. They
Yeah.
just, because they said it's cheaper than getting a lot of people into a classroom or getting a lot of fancy training, when sometimes all they need is a quick 10 to 20-minute huddle. They get together, they talk about a problem, they talk about the solutions, and they say, go for it. And those work. They can be very effective because they're all talking together. And
That's good. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but I got excited. But the thing that I find to be very exciting about this is that, and it ties back to what Colin was talking about in the lecture free zone. It's a combination of informal and formal, but it's all outcomes based. So you know what you want it to look like at the end. So you have something you can measure, but you go about it in ways that are going to maximize engagement.
Sure. It's excuse me, I'm going to cough. It's all about the social side of things. Everything we do in L&D is all about social. And somebody asked me the other day about a similar question about how many courses have I been on recently? And I said, yeah, I'll tell you what, I haven't been on a course, a formal course, for 10 years plus. And so they said, so how do you keep up to date and how do you learn new things? And I said, have you heard of YouTube? And have you ever asked somebody who knows how to, let's say I've got a problem with some editing software that I use and I can't remember how to do it. What would I do? I'd go onto a forum or to a collaboration site where there are other people who are editors, and they would say, well, this is how you do it. You do this, that, and that. Give it a try and come back to me if you have a problem. This is how all organizations have got to start learning, and you've got to give up the control of saying, you must sit on these courses. I want you to do these courses. You've got to let them free, set them free. They've got to go and find it out themselves. And you know, until we do that, we're going to be training people like we did in the Victorian times of hundreds of people sitting in front of the teacher. And we know that doesn't work.
what's the old saying? The beatings will continue until morale improves?
I love that. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Well, we are, Colin, at the end of our time. And
really?
but this is only the first show. We're going to have you on again.
Really?
Because there's a lot we can cover, and we've only just kind of tipped the iceberg, hit the tip of the iceberg today. But we do appreciate you coming on. In fact, you're probably going to be on next week on the Electoral Live show. So,
Okay, thank you.
So we'll see you again there, and we can continue some of these ideas. And Susan, as always, a pleasure. And
Thank you.
and now we have you full screen today and looking good and everything. This is good.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
We're glad you could make it. You're not flooded today, I hope. No flooding in Oklahoma today.
No, it's beautiful. It's a little bit hot and muggy, but it's wonderful.
That sounds good. And Colin, again, appreciate you coming on. We look forward to seeing you. And do send me a note on the dates and times of the conference, and we'll put that in the show notes so that when people go to YouTube, they'll have a link to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And for all you people watching in the chat room, or actually watching the recording of this, please click on the like or dislike button. We've actually had one dislike in the last 5 years. And I don't know who did that. It must have been a typo. That's what we think. No. But you can't please everybody. But no, please click on the like and the subscribe button. We'd love to hear from you. And when you do subscribe, you'll see the show once it's up automatically. You won't have to look for it. Anyway, have a good one, everyone, for Life Edge. We will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
It was a pleasure, Colin.
Yeah, very nice to meet you, Susan. Very nice. It was good. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.